Okay, so our pod, we had Alan Wilcox, Eric McNamara, Jeff Postma, Jessica Murdoch, Mike Kraft, and myself. And Justin Hesse as well. He was hidden underneath the little thing. I knew there was someone else. Justin left us. We're sad. But we sat down and we said, what are our goals for this? Azure's a big thing. How are we going to do something that will help everyone in the practice? And we said, well, let's take and pass the AZ 900 exam, which is just basically, the introduction to Azure. The overview talks about different things: security, networking, storage, compute, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and the different offerings. Talk about how we could use Azure in our practice and what kind of value we might get from there, and then prepare some starter solutions. So that was our goals. And then reality hit, client demands, just graduated. We did get the certification done, but did not necessarily get to all of the other things, especially those starter solutions that we were hoping to. So anyway, just quickly an overview of Azure as you might need to know it from a CRM practice. I don't think we'll ever be asked and tasked to come up with a pure Azure solution. It'll just be how does it tie in. And the main things you need to know there is that Azure is Microsoft's cloud offering. It has, roughly about 500 million things in it, and they have 2-week sprints, and it changes every 2 weeks. But other than that, it's great. And you have the different levels of offerings. You have infrastructure as a service, which is basically virtual machines and networking and all those things that you used to have to do when you'd rack and stack. You don't need to do the rack and stack anymore, but you can buy the components. And then we have platform as a service, which gives us more of a platform layer and things to work off. And this might be things like function apps, logic apps, things like that, where you're still doing a lot of the code. And then software as a service, where you're basically buying a service. You don't have very much control over it. Our favorite dynamic CRM is an example of software as a service where we can do a little bit of customization, but basically, we're stuck with what we get. So some of the tools that we looked at and said we might use and might want to use with our practice. So Azure Key Vault is an implementation of a secure secret storage. So you can load your secrets into Key Vault. You can then use an environment variable or a Key Vault reference to get to that Key Vault and read it and use that. And so anytime we're doing any kind of coding where we need to go out and retrieve a username and password, if we retrieve it from Key Vault, the nice thing there is it's securely stored. There's permissions around who can read it. They can even set it up so that we don't have to have the passwords, and they can change them as need. And as you go from dev to test to production, as long as you keep the name of the Azure Key Vault key, and the reference to that consistent, and just change the value, it makes it very easy to move between those environments without having to have different code or different setup for the different environments. Okay, our Azure Logic app. That's something that we have used for integration, and we've talked about that in other learning forums and all of the things that people hate about it, how slow it is, how no code it is, and therefore things that might be simple everywhere else you have to jump through hoops for. I think we're moving away from logic apps for integration, but basically anywhere that you could use a flow, you could probably use a logic app as well. Azure Function Apps are Microsoft's serverless implementation. So the function apps allow you to spin up an instance on demand to process something and then to have that go away, and you only pay for the time that it is running. And so if you have something like batch jobs, data ingest, something like that, a function app might be a useful and cost-effective way of doing that. Where they may fall down is if you need something that responds immediately because you've got that spin up time. So now you're you're having to keep one function running forever, and that will cost you a little bit for that. Have Azure Application Registration or Azure Active Directory. And the application registration is a feature of Azure Active Directory. We use that all the time if you're setting up a service account and you're using OData login credentials. You use the application registration, first of all, to get that client ID, client secret that you're using in order to connect. And so if you're having server-to-server communication, third-party applications that you want to have where the token will expire and you have to get a refresh, and the security and also the interoperability around OAuth 2, application registration is your friend. And then finally, the pricing calculator being the thing that probably, if you were to be asked about Azure, someone would say, well, okay, Key Vault, how much is that going to cost me? Or Function Apps, how much is that going to cost me? That's something that you might need to look at. So really quickly, we'll get over here to our pricing calculator. And in here, you can go and look. You bring it up, azure.microsoft.com/en/us/pricing/calculator, or you just Google pricing calculator because, that's easier than remembering that. But let's say we want to add in, and here we've got our popular. So let's say we want to add in Azure Functions, and maybe because we're worried about it, we're going to add in Azure Active Directory, and then, well, we'll just go with that because we're running out of time here. So when you come down here to your estimate, it's going to ask you some things. First of all, where do you want this? So depending on where this is hosted, the cost could be different. So if we just say West US 2, and we want either consumption or premium. Basically consumption, things don't cost you a lot, but they're slow to spin up, and you can run into timeouts. And so a lot of times people will say, well, I need the premium tier. And once I get into premium tier, now I've got dedicated hardware. So maybe we'll say I want an EP2. That's 2 cores, 7 gig of RAM, 250 gig of storage. That right there for a month is going to cost me $291.85. So we say I want one that's always running, and then I think I'm going to have up to 3 more that will scale out, but they're only going to be used during the day. So roughly a third of that, but then weekends. So let's say we're going to say 130 hours a month. Okay, so that's another $155.92. Still doesn't cost us anything up front, but we're looking at about $600 a month, for that. And the thing is that no matter how you do this, these are all just guesses. Unless they've already been running something in a different cloud or in their own data center and they know the usage pattern, they're just making wild guesses here. So my recommendation is that you have them fill this out, because otherwise they come back to you and say, hey, you said it was only going to be $500 for this and another $500 for that. And, it came back and it was, triple that. We don't think we should pay it. We think you should pay it, or something like that. So basically you get them to fill this out. They come through and they say, oh, yep, that's exactly, how much I would expect to spend. The salespeople are really good about explaining to them, well, this $1,000 a month, think about what it would cost you for all the servers and all the networking, the electricity and the cooling and the everything else. That's a CapEx or a capital expense. Now you can do it as an OpEx monthly contract. You can scale up, scale down, all those other things that you can do. I did have a slide on pricing calculator, and then any questions on this?